At the end of the day, anything that has compute power can be hacked. Simple as that. And you can always get into well, it's not connected to the internet. I can still get to it. This is the dirty secret of cybersecurity, because all of that tooling that we do, just as most of it is supporting detection, which is mostly supporting humans in the loop. Your analysts at the Security Operations Center, your analysts at the MSSP. It's people-based. Most of cybersecurity is still people-based. Tools don't make things happen. People make things happen. Executives make things happen. And then tools just help you get there quicker once you pick the right direction.
Hey everyone, meet Bryson Bort, a West Point graduate who traded his Army uniform for the battlefield of cybersecurity. As CEO and founder of Scythe, he's revolutionizing how organizations test their defenses through threat emulation. But Bryson's impact goes far beyond just one company. He also founded Grim Cybersecurity Consultancy and co-founded the ICS Village, and has even been named a top 50 in cyber by Business Insider. Glad to have you here, Bryson.
Really glad to be here, John.
Well, let's talk about where you came from a little bit. You were in the military. I think it's really interesting that you went to West Point. And tell us about your 4 years in the military and how this. Let's see. Can you share what? Oh, okay. So let me just start over there. So you served 4 years in the military from 2000 to 2004. That's almost 20 years ago now. I'm sure you realize that. And
I feel it in my bones whenever it rains.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And then, tell us a little bit how you went. What did you do at West Point? And obviously you went to school there, but in the military, did you do cyber work there too, or was that something that you got into after your military career?
So I always find that question curious, particularly from somebody who looks as young as I am, where folks ask, when did were you doing cybersecurity back then? And it's like, cybersecurity didn't exist back then, right? We didn't have it. So let me back up and then I'll walk into that answer with more detail. So I wanted to go to West Point because I wanted to serve. It felt kind of trite in the 90s to be a patriot, but that's how I looked at it, is that I wanted to give something back to this country. And I thought that military service was the best way to do that. In particular, I wanted to go become an Army officer versus one of the other ones, because the Navy and the Air Force are much more technical disciplines. And while I feel a lot of kinship with the Marines, I didn't see the point of going to the Naval Academy first to try to become a Marine. Might as well just go the pure play. I actually turned down a scholarship to MIT to go to West Point because I wanted to serve. While at West Point, I think we were the 5th class there who actually had gotten issued computers. And so computers were still a bit of a new thing there. When I was a junior, I was what was called an information security sergeant, which pretty much meant, again, going back to what cybersecurity was, whenever a virus came out, we would run around with a gold disk and install at every computer, and you would track it in the Excel spreadsheet, and you were just constantly doing those kinds of things. And then my senior year, I was actually the first brigade information security officer. So if you can think about it like a cadet CISO for the Corps, I was the first one at West Point. And that was really interesting. One of the other funny little parts to this, because obviously West Point is not only an academic university, but is a federally DoD-owned installation, right? We are actually active duty Army. Well, for anybody who's ever worked in academia, in fact, I just did a phone call with an operations manager at one of the large university systems in the country. And one of the problems they have is this balance of academic and First Amendment freedom for their students. Well, it was the same thing at West Point. And why I'm bringing that up is that, they're also young kids who are coming into their oats, and there's a lot of porn. And so you have this balance of what is our official policy on porn and access to it, as well as the fact that, of course, that is a primary delivery mechanism for malware. This was around, I graduated 2000, which everybody remembers, the dot-com era. And I was convinced to move from armor tanks into the Signal Corps, which I think I still regret. I missed the tanks part. That was a lot more fun than the nerd stuff. And in the Signal Corps, that was less, cybersecurity still, and more around shoot, move, and communicate. So we were there establishing data, video, phone links in random sandy places, satellite backhauls. And then as I started to go up the ranks and became the brigade engineering officer, then things started to tie in a bit into what we called information assurance, which is modern day cybersecurity. I got hurt during the war. And so when we were going back to Baghdad, I was medically discharged. And then my first civilian job, I ended up working at a manufacturer, which I bring that up just because I think a lot of folks struggle, even in our own space, to understand what process and a lot of the system design is. And the reason for that is because it's abstract. How do I look at data? Well, I can only abstractly model data. Whereas in manufacturing, the output of a process is physical bits. So you can quickly identify how this all works. And so that, the what is process is F of X equals Y plus sigma. Really, I learned that because I got to do it. In fact, I went on and became a certified Lean Six Sigma. But that really helped me. And I feel like that foray outside of cybersecurity and information technology gave me a much better grounding to come back into it. And then certainly ties into a lot of the work that I do in manufacturing, energy, and industrial control systems now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I started working with the U.S. Navy in 2003 as a contractor. And that's when I kind of got started with what we would call cybersecurity today. But you're right, it was called information assurance back then. And it was spreadsheets and floppy disks and CDs that you ran around with and tried to patch systems in the tens of thousands.
Yep. with one by one.
One by one. And there's plenty of overtime to give your enlisted people to run around and patch things. Kind of interesting. Also, I didn't know that you had done like Lean Six Sigma. I think that's interesting. I did Lean Six Sigma as well when, back in like 2005 as a result of a failed cybersecurity inspection at the installation that I was at. And we were just trying to figure out how to patch, right? And it was a big part of how we failed the inspection was that, we just couldn't patch. And we did a Lean Six Sigma thing to go figure it out. And that's what it is. It's a process. And I think you're right. I think in a physical plant, you can see the bits go from one process out to the other. And you see the SIPOC, supplier, input, process, output, consumer. But it really helped me kind of figure out how to run programs better, because, it's like, why are you doing something if it doesn't actually make the output better? Then why are you doing it? Right. Or if it's supposed to, then change it or figure out what it is. And I think it helped me in my career too, to go through that. It's interesting. I also find that I just got a tractor, and I imagine it's somewhat like having a tank where you run around with the physical device and you're pushing shit around.
Yeah, but you lost me there, John. I don't think there's anything that's like a tank, but fair enough. Close.
I can just kill myself in it, but it's been fun running it around on my little property here. So anyway, I guess you've also an advisor to West Point now. Is that right?
Yeah. So there was a brain trust out of West Point a number of years ago. So I got recruited into the intelligence community, and that's what brought me back to Washington, D.C. in 2007. And then I got into the super secret squirrel side of offensive cyber. And no, not the NSA stuff. Like ours was cyber on the battlefield. And we were the only places really doing that. And that was the greatest job I ever could have had. And I was really just the right guy at the right place, the right time. And I went down there, and it was like the inmates running the asylum kind of look. And I took over eventually, and then grew the unit to a few hundred folks, with folks embedded in Iraq and Afghanistan and different parts. And my point on that is I ran into the brain trust of colonels who were starting to formulate this idea of cyber as a domain, which in military parlance means this is how we do effect, right? We talk about tanks. Well, tank is a land effect. I can control space on land with a tank. Well, cyber is the same equivalent, which is where you see a lot of the things happening now, and different forms of that showing up on the battlefield, particularly in the Ukraine-Russian war, which is where most folks have been paying close attention to that. And we've also seen it in the Israeli and Iranian conflict recently, with the Israelis using it to disrupt Iranian operations, and the Iranians using it on the Israelis to hack into webcams to try to assess what battle damage assessment of the missiles they launched against Israel. So these kernels were starting to go, how do we create our own cyber force? And I was like, well, I mean, I have operational experience. Would you like to move from the academic to seeing how it really works? Because that's what we're doing. We've been piloting this. Well, I couldn't say piloting. We were spearheading this. And we were kind of just making up things as they go. I mean, the only checks on what we did were the lawyers, because we would get missions and we'd go and check with the lawyers and be like, hey, does this match authority? Can we do this? What are the left-right limits of what we can do? And a lot of folks have this opinion of lawyers just being like, no, 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 in a very conservative environment. But back at the height of the counterterrorism high-value target mission that we had, I never got a no. Our teams never got a no. Now, part of that is because we were doing the right things. Part of that is because we made the lawyers feel very comfortable with what we were going to do. And part of it was also just, it was the Wild West, and we were able to do all that stuff. So those kernels went on to help create Cyber Command and Army Cyber. And from that was the birth of an institution called the Army Cyber Institute out of West Point, which was kind of meant to be the DoD think tank approach to these ideas. I got recruited to be on the board as an advisor. And I did that for about 4 years. And then the Army Cyber Institute changed in its organizational setup. So they reset and they created a different kind of board now called the Cyber Science Advisory Board, where I've been serving for a little bit more than a year at West Point. And that has a broader component than just Army Cyber Institute looking at requirements for the Army for cyber, but also the actual curriculum and accreditation of those programs at West Point. To just highlight one program to give you an idea of the Army Cyber Institute, the one that I've been the most proud of is called Jack Voltaic. This kicked back in 2016, and it looks at the interdependence of civilian critical infrastructure. So how does water, electricity, transportation, port systems, maritime, all of this work around a post for the military to be able to send forces somewhere in the world for a mission? And it's not something you think about, because I think a lot of folks are just kind of like, oh, the US military is very competent. We need to put things in. I've seen Hollywood. We put things on a helicopter and it goes somewhere. Well, it's actually a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more to it than that. And so that's where we've been running these exercises. And one of the advantages of that have been we've created templates and tools for cities to use on the civilian side to be able to look at their own critical infrastructure dependence.
Yeah, I think when I think about military and the Army in particular, I think about supply lines. How does something get from one place to another place? And, it's one of the, whenever you see like military shows, you see that folks are always trying to figure out how to cut supply lines and, starve the invading army and those kinds of things. But today we're so dependent on technology to make sure that we know where things are. For example, do we have inventory of our missiles and bombs and stuff like that? We have a dependency on technology for that. And I remember back in the information assurance days in the mid 2000s that I couldn't update Java in certain areas because it would, mess with the missile loading system of some some device, right? And so I guess when you're talking about ICS and the water and the stuff around the post, I guess that's another way of kind of cutting supply lines and making it difficult for the military to operate.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to throw out my prediction, because everybody, I believe, is aware of the rising tensions between China and Taiwan. And the prevailing intelligence expert opinion is that there will be an invasion 2027 to 2028. I personally think it's going to be a couple more years after that. For those of you who think that 90 miles per hour, 90 miles of water doesn't look like much, that little strait is actually a lot more complicated than it seems. Combined arms are also something that are very difficult to do. That's the expression of, again, going back to those domains. How do I bring air, space, land, sea, and cyber all together for a combined effect? A great example of how hard this is, look at how the Russians have been waxed in Ukraine. That's, I mean, as much as they've suffered, they were a premier military force. And part of it was the complexity of combined arms in a conflicted environment. My point being back with Taiwan is I think that's going to be a few years later. And also, I think that cyber is going to have the first significant impact on a kinetic battlefield from it. Now, I think the listener immediately goes to the concept that was covered by P.W. Singer in a book called Ghost Fleet, which he published a number of years ago, where cyber was used to directly disable U.S. Navy forces. I don't think that's going to be what's going to happen. I mean, back to your supply chain metaphor, John, I think the Chinese are going to use cyber to disrupt our command and control mechanisms back here to facilitating the deployment of assets. At the end of the day, the best tank, the best destroyer to fight is the one that doesn't show up on the battlefield. And that's something that they're incredibly vulnerable to cyber to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're reminding me of programs that I was in when I was working with military as well. Where definitely we had programs to basically close out our command and control, our CNC system, so that we didn't, to get into the command and control was way more difficult. And this is probably in the 2008, 2010 kind of time frames where we were thinking about this on the military side is how do we keep our aircraft, the integrity of our aircraft carriers and the command and control systems. Can you trust what you see on the display, right? Yep. Are you really going north, or which way are you going, right? And without being able to inject false data into systems. I mean, I don't think of it this way at all. I don't think of it as ICS, right? I think of it as an IT system that's being compromised, right? But it is actually affecting, what the operator of the aircraft carrier, the helmsman, right? Which way is he going to go? Is he going to go with the rest of the battle group, or is he going to go away from the battle group, right? But I guess it is similar in some aspects. I guess I don't know.
Well, so I feel
like I'm a little confused right now. We're talking about Taiwan and China and getting across the straits and combined effects from your airspace, land, cyber kind of capabilities. And we
have the same problem in the civilian world. This is something that your average viewer understands, right? Visibility, reaction, and integrity in that visibility are still the problem everybody in cybersecurity is solving.
Yeah.
Right? This is an unsolved space, whether you're an IT or industrial control system, same thing. So let's take the industrial control systems off the table as the way you were going there first, right? One, what is an industrial control system? The first joke I make is it's any computer that's at least 20 years old.
Okay.
Once that humor hits, you start to realize that's why it's running an out-of-date operating system. That is a very long life cycle that it has been designed for, which now means security was not designed into it because it couldn't have been. It was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Right. It's 10 years ago. It's 5 years ago, but the operating system is already end of life. And what am I supposed to do? So once we take that, the only difference is industrial control systems change the physical world. Whereas IT, a bad day is loss of data and money. A bad day in industrial control systems literally can be loss of life. But they are computers, just as you described, right? They just have different applications. So they're all the same thing from a computer perspective. And at the end of the day, anything that has compute power can be hacked. Simple as that. And you can always get into it's not connected to the internet. I can still get to it. Again, look at what I used to do for a living. Trust me, things that were hidden behind guards and barbed wire and concrete rooms that had no internet access to, we still got to them because there is always a way. Never forget close access. If I can physically touch something, that's the same thing. If I can have radio frequency proximity, right? How far can I get to Bluetooth? How far can I get to your Wi-Fi? How far can I get to whatever those protocols are? That's still an access method. The internet was just the great game changer where suddenly it's easy for me to wake up anywhere else in the world and go, all right, what am I going to do? I'm going to come after you because I can. The internet makes that simple. That changed the risk profile. But at the end of the day, whatever has computation that I can get access to, I can do something to. And so most of us for the last 15 years have been on this visibility kick. Where do I collect logs? Where do I gain insights? How do I get those insights? How do I correlate those insights to then bring response? And so that leads to now architecture. And the reality is you only have two categories of technical controls you're employing in your environment. Prevent, what do I stop? Detect, what do I see that kicks off that visibility thing? And of course, everybody is like, well, why wouldn't I want to have as much prevention as possible? I mean, keeping the masked intruder in the baklava who is doing this on a computer away from me, that sounds great, except that's really, really, really hard to do. And primarily, we can only do it through static rule sets, which is why when you look at threat intelligence and you look at most of what's coming there, it's very basic IOCs, bad hash, bad domain, bad IP. Because those are easy to ingest, they're easy to identify. And more importantly, when I'm making a call that something should be stopped, there's a very, very low likelihood of me stopping something legitimate, which is the flip side of this. Because security tools that prevent legitimate processes, people doing what they're supposed to be doing, don't last. They get ripped out. They get circumvented, right? Anybody who's a parent knows this. When you tell a kid no and they really want to do it, they're going to be the best hackers in the world. Well, your employees are the same way. When you create preventative friction, they're going to figure out how to rip it out and go around it. So less than 1% of your technical controls are prevention. Most of your controls are actually in detection, which let's think about what that means. This is the dirty secret of cybersecurity, because all of that tooling that we do, just as most of it is supporting detection, which is mostly supporting humans in the loop. Your analysts at the Security Operations Center, your analysts at the MSSP. It's people-based. Most of cybersecurity is still people-based. It is a machine throws up an alert, a human operator comes in and goes, I think it's like this or like that, makes a call, and we move on. That's most of it. And the problem we have is, again, we now have the NSA problem. We have spent so much effort on building visibility, we didn't think how to do it intelligently. And so the reason I call it the NSA problem is back when NSA during the counterterrorism mission was the Hoover of the internet. Let's get everything. Because if we get everything, then that means there's nothing we missed. And enterprises approach their cybersecurity stack the same way. Let's get everything that we can because I want to make sure I don't miss something. Well, the more you have, the harder it is to find what you want. And the more likely it is that things break. And so you're creating expense because data retention has a cost. And you're creating expense and friction because your analysts now are trying to look through more things without the system being tuned to them. More is not better.
Not necessarily. I remember an incident that I was on, and we had Mandy come in to help us, right? And I remember this guy coming in, and he was like, "Hey, well, if you don't have enough data, then we can write a tool to go grab it." And I'm like, "Wow, that's actually not my problem. My problem is I have too much data, and it's all really kind of a mess, right? It's not formatted correctly, and time isn't right." I can't tell if it's a Hong Kong time zone or some other time zone. I just can't tell. So, but yeah, just even the cost of configuring your data sets and getting them into the right format and into someplace where you can look at it is hard. But then like you said, when you have a lot of data, then it's just a more analysis paralysis kind of problems, right? Meaning that what's interesting about a big network, which is different from a small network, and it, like you said, untuned, right? I'm going to say, is that everything looks like a rabbit. Everything's something to chase, right? There's just so many things that you as an investigator don't know about. And you're like, why is this system doing this weird thing? Right. And you go and you look at it, and it turns out that it wasn't doing a weird thing. It was doing what it was supposed to do. It was just, you just had not had experience with it. So you have these humans, investigators that are chasing rabbits, right? And that's what I would call it. On this particular investigation, I think we were like 3 months, 24/7, and the Singapore team would come online, and I'd ask them, "Hey, what happened? What happened during your shift?" I was in New York at the time. And they would tell me about this stuff, and then the result of the day was that they didn't have a conclusion because they chased a bunch of rabbits, right? And it's I guess it's not bad that they did, but going back to the problem is that there's a lot of data. You have humans that are looking at information. They don't have perfect knowledge of the very complex systems that are in enterprises. And then they're trying to make a judgment call in some manner of time to say, hey, is this an incident? Is this something that I need to, really run up the chain and start investigating? Or is it, a false positive, right? Or a false negative or a whatever. So what is the, that's the NSA problem, right? And it goes into, I think we're going to talk a little bit about prioritization of our adversaries or likely adversaries, and how do we get the right information to protect our systems? Because if you have too much data, right, and it's not tuned to your particular environment or your threat profile, then you're kind of wasting money, like you said, on data retention, data quality, the analyst time investigating things that are not relevant to your particular problem that you're having as a business. So what's a good approach for that?
Yeah. The baseline problem is a great one, because this stuff doesn't, the joke is the stuff doesn't have an evil bit, right? There isn't traffic that's going and it's like, oh, the evil bit's on. That's how I know it's bad traffic. It all looks the same. I mean, adversaries blend in to who you are. Pop quiz. What is the most common command and control protocol used in the world in all incidents?
Teams?
HTTPS.
HTTPS. Okay.
Secure web traffic.
Teams.
Why? 70% of malware command and control traffic is HTTPS, because it's what your employees use for everything.
Absolutely.
Teams doesn't work because Teams is session based. So I can only do like these segments.
That's right.
Whereas web traffic is just constantly going. And here's the other thing. I didn't have to create some specialized Russian GRU encryption protocol. I'm just going to use yours. And that blends right in. In fact, you're giving me my tradecraft. You're giving me the encryption. You're giving me the cover. I just blend right into all of that. Now try and find me, right? So I'm just going to use what you got, which gets back to also most of the things that you see used in your environment are called living off the land. So living off the land binaries and scripts, living off the land, kernel drivers, all of these things that are in your environment, I can repurpose, especially if I have the right privileges, which is why if you look, 90% of all red teaming is PowerShell, because it's a really easy way to powerfully do all the things I want in my environment. I'll give you another example of a baseline. So we were doing a purple team engagement for a customer. And for those of you who don't know, you all graduated first grade. Purple teaming is red plus blue equals purple. So red, I don't need a red team. I just need a red signal. I need some way to realistically drive a threat behavior in the environment. And it can be really simple or it can be really complex. It doesn't matter. It's where your maturity is at and the scope of what you're trying to do. Blue is obvious. That's our operations. So how do our operations do it? And the idea here is that we are collaboratively and transparently planning the scope, the execution, and the remediation of the risk assessment together, hence purple. And so we were doing this for a client, and the red capabilities of the threat we wanted to build out had a lot of PowerShell in them. And so we were going to help them build out PowerShell detection mechanisms. Well, going back to the baseline problem, again, PowerShell is a Microsoft signed binary that is a part of the Microsoft operating system. And by the way, if you have Linux or Mac, PowerShell can also work on Linux and Mac. So it works everywhere, but it is definitely organic to your Windows environment, and you can't remove it. You can disable it, you can limit it, you can audit it, but you can't remove it. And so as we built the detection up for the PowerShell, the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree because the CISO had promised us. He's like, oh, no, we don't use PowerShell at all. Don't worry. Whatever he's going to be is just your test. And we're like, well, your dashboard says otherwise. It sure looks like PowerShell is being used extensively in your environment. And it was, because the IT management team was using it and the CISO wasn't aware of that. And so we had
Yeah, it's even just not even the IT management. It's just the install process of software uses
That could be it
PowerShell,
too.
right? It's
Yeah.
just coming from Microsoft or whoever your vendors are, just running PowerShell scripts
There's
all
lots
over
of
the
reasons to have
place.
PowerShell in your environment. And so we had to establish the baseline of his normal PowerShell to then properly build the detective component for security. Because we didn't want to be detecting, Microsoft getting installed. We didn't want to be detecting, somebody resetting a password from a help desk ticket. We only wanted to be looking at the PowerShell that would be illegitimately used, which again is a hard problem. So there's a real world example of where we ran into that baseline problem and why it's something that everybody is struggling with.
Yeah. And I think that's why you see a lot of false positives, or not false positives.
You see a lot of hay in the SIM because nobody tunes their systems because it's really hard to do. And this is where I feel really bad because, again, we just talked about that most of the systemic part of cybersecurity is people. And yet I don't think we pay enough attention to the human capital cost of that. And if you are a tier 1 SOC analyst, there's a reason you last 12 to 18 months because your whole job is looking in piles of hay, hoping there's a needle. And most of the time there isn't. And so you're just going through hay after hay after hay, fighting a system that hasn't been tuned for you. And this is where we've seen the rise of detection engineering, which is an entire field on how do we improve that? Well, that's an even more niche field with even fewer people who can do it. So there's even fewer organizations. And instead, we get this is why cybersecurity continues to fail and the human cost of the burnout that we're doing to these analysts, which is the largest percentage of cybersecurity positions.
Yeah, and you're right. It's like you're looking through a bunch of hay, looking for that needle in the haystack, and then as soon as there's a problem, then it's like, why did you human fail? Right? It's invariably going to happen, right? I think some MSPs are really good at like finding what they're good at. Like I've worked at some MSPs where we were really good at data center ops and how servers operate and finding things that bad things happen on servers, right? But that same technology didn't really apply into an enterprise environment, right? It's just meaning that it's like watching attacks come in from the outside. You can tune your systems to find those, right? SQL injections, et cetera, right? People trying to bypass your WAF. You can look for those things. It's a much smaller area to look at. But when you're on the enterprise side, like you're saying, everything's HTTPS. And it's just getting worse because it used to be that we had data centers and we had corporate offices and we knew our communication with our apps was going to go down this path, right? If you're going to go VPN into the data center so you could run this app, it was going to be basically some sort of proprietary protocol between your FAT app and your application. And that was, basically like mid 2000s, mid 2010s. And now we've just kind of started moving into cloud infrastructure. And people are adopting a lot of SaaS apps, which are also using HTTPS to go and access those things, via API, whether it's RESTful APIs or whatever that's going on. It's just the amount of data that's out there today compared to what we could control, where we could say this is a good place to go and this is a bad place to go, and being able to control that with your, proxy gateways and such. That problem has got to have made the CISO's job harder from a threat emulation perspective as well.
Well, and that problem has now just gotten an entire sea change. So we have spent a couple of decades on a traditional data access model, which roles-based access control worked really well. And then artificial intelligence a couple of years ago became the new way of the world. And I'm not even talking about AI and security. I'm not even talking about AI and offense, which we can talk about. I'm talking about AI as the game changer for the way everything works in humanity, period. And that result is AI today represents a knowledge management revolution. All AI is doing today is knowledge management. Because I put all of that data together, right? We spent all this time putting all this data, and we have these data lakes, and we have data oceans, and we have data rivers. I don't even know. There's data. And AI has made it easier for me to not have to necessarily understand all of my data and even work with data that's not normalized to answer these pieces. And now you have a different security problem because it isn't access to the data that's the problem. It's access through the LLM, the AI interface, to the context around my understanding of that data. And that's now the new security model problem that we're trying to work.
Talk to me more about that. I think it's one thing is like you have human operators, even in the enterprise, that are legitimate. I'm not saying they're a threat in any way, but they have a hard time accessing all the different places that they have data.
Yep.
Right. And now we're putting LLMs in the mix and we're creating connectors to our data with them. And now we're making it easier for people that may have been challenged by access controls or tools or understanding how the tools work or how to use search in the tool or whatever. And we've just kind of given them a interface where I can just ask for something and give it.
Yep.
Right. And so we've really reduced the barrier of entry to information greatly.
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're telling me right now, this new model, is it, I mean, if it's good for our user community, it's good for an actor as well, right?
Again, living off the land, I'm going to use, hackers are lazy. I don't want to do more work or build something I don't have to build. It's expensive and it's unnecessary to complete my mission. So if I can use the tools, the accesses, and the things you have in your environment, I'm going to. And that comes back to, again, this is what we do at Scythe, is we're the technical term is a post-access modular malware platform. So once an enterprise has been breached, because again, going back to the human side, we know most of the breaches happen because of users. It's not a technical problem. It's a social problem. And it's one we're never going to solve. Users are always going to use computers the way they were designed. I have an email client. I get email. I click on emails. That's how I understand how to use them. And if me doing that burns the enterprise to the ground, that's security's problem, not the user's problem. And it just, again, it's the reality we'll never get through there. So what we did is looked and said, okay, well, once they're in, now what? And there's lots of different metaphors and allegories around offense and defense with how easy or hard it is. And the reality is that when you look at the entire attack chain, it's infinite. There are just an infinite number of ways for me to creatively come up with a combination of, again, meat-based social answers combined with technical ones to then accomplish my thing. That's how I get in, and it's how we always get in, and it is always the case. So I don't think that there's a lot of value in that. Again, that's prevention, that's surface area, that's hygiene. Mm-hmm. But once you're in, here's where it matters, because that's where you, the attacker, are in fact accomplishing a mission against me. That's where you're stealing. That's where you're robbing. That's where you're taking things. So that's the part you care about the most as a defender, is once I'm in, not actually the prevention. You care about what you do next. And here's the cool part. It's actually a constrained space. An attacker can only work, again, back on my definition of hacking, it takes a computer that has to have computational capability. So I can only work on computers you have, because I need computation capability to do something. Those computers only talk the way that you've designated. Again, going back to my encryption HTTPS analogy, I can't show up with my own custom protocol. It'll stick out. I have to blend in with what you already got. So it's your users, your computers talking your way. And so what our tool does is look at that and go, well, that means all threat behaviors really have two components: talk, do things. And we turn those into Legos so people can build their own Legos. And then you can put the Legos together because the order of the Legos matters. This is something where most people have abused MITRE ATT&CK in turning it into a bingo card, because they're like, oh, do that, do that, do that.
Right.
No. When I do that, I am now that user on that asset with this access, and that is going to look different. And the results of that are then going to inform the next thing I do and the next thing I do. And now I have a chemical equation coming out of my periodic table of MITRE ATT&CK, not just checking off a bunch of attack elements.
Right.
And I think that's a huge failure I see out in industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what you're talking about two things. One, attack progression. How do you progress your attack, right? And then in the middle of it, you're evolving your attack, right? Because you
learn
as you move forward, and you're at this space with this user credentials, and you have this technology available. You have these systems that you can access.
Yes,
that is the limit. That's the constraints that you have as an attacker in your environment. So, what can you do? What's the next step? Do you need to elevate privileges? Do you need to do something else? That constrains what your actual next step is. And I think that's what you're saying is that, and that's the evolution of the attack. That's the attacker trying to figure out what he can do next. How does he evolve? And sometimes it's a regressive things, and I have to go step back in my I'll say kill chain, but if from progressing, I regress so that I can go a different direction. I might have to go back and look at other steps that might have a better path. As an adversary, I don't try to make my life harder. I'm trying to figure out how do I get to my objective, whatever that is, in the fastest way possible with the fewest amount of triggers. I mean, it used to not be that way. It used to be that, attackers used to bring their whole tool chains with them, right? And then we could go and say, well, we didn't have, netcat on this box before, but now there's netcat. So now there's a indicator there, bottom of the pyramid of pain kind of stuff. But that was like 2010 kind of work, 2015 kind of work, not 2025 kind of activity, right?
Same problem, just different scope. So we're no longer going, oh, I need netcat there. Now we're going, all right, I had something collecting the visibility. Now I need to tune that to make sure that I am in fact responding to it. Here are two absolute truths that I've seen. One, companies with more money have better cybersecurity, period. More equals more, and the more works out. Now, everyone will still get hacked, but at least you have imposed some cost on that because that transfers. And then, I forgot what my second wisdom was there. The first one was all right.
The first one was good, but it's true. The more money that you have, the more you can apply to your cybersecurity problem, right? And then it's going to make the barrier of entry for the attacker higher.
Now you reminded me of my second one, which is the longer an attacker can operate in your environment has a direct correlation to the amount of impact.
Sure, absolutely.
You more, there's more to you, right? Those are two kind of tongue in cheek, but they're really true when you look at them. And once you start to see that, you go, okay, so that means I need to reduce time, which means dwell time. How long is an attacker able to operate where I have no record and I haven't responded yet?
Absolutely.
And that's mean time to respond. So this is where I would challenge, not only do I need to tune my visibility, I need to do that with an eye to measure the time component. So it isn't just a comprehensive, can I see? It's also how quickly do my people respond, because that has a direct correlation to impact over time.
And this has a correlation to cost too.
Bingo. And that's now where we're starting to get a return on investment that along the way allows us to, again, if we do this over time, nobody on this planet can guarantee you they can stop 0 day. I cannot stop an exploit of a vulnerability that has never been seen before. Just like, again, all the different ways that phishing happens and continues to happen. Initial access can't be stopped. A determined adversary will get in. But when you start looking at this post-access space, here's what's really interesting. Going back to we were talking about attack logic and order of battle. Well, there's only so many things they can do, which means if you start training this stuff over time and tuning your visibility and your detections and your responses into some of these things, you're going to catch things that have never been seen before from a campaign level, because there's going to be logic collision. Because there's only, again, so many things an attacker can do and wants to do. And there's been very little innovation on this part for the attacker. We haven't imposed a lot of cost because most folks haven't created enough speed bumps to stop them to need to do that.
Yeah, we're still in that, castle model, so to speak.
We are.
Right? Where we're trying to prevent. And, going back to what you were saying before, prevention is the most expensive, right, way to go. It's hard. It creates frictions for your users.
Yep.
And I know this from a lot of experience as a CISO, is that first thing that happens when something breaks is they're trying to, roll back my security, right? Let me turn off this firewall. Let me turn off these firewall rules. Let me turn off the WAF rules. Let me turn this off. Let me turn that off. And then once I regress, me getting my security posture back up has a lot more testing to do as well, right? So anytime I do preventive kind of capabilities, it's difficult. I think it's it's in enterprise environments, right? I personally think initial access I think the industry really hasn't changed its castle defense model. They're not realizing that users are reaching out and bringing stuff in. I think they do know that, kind of. They get it, that we have lots of stuff going with phishing exercises and security training, and very little of it. We try to do Cybersecurity Month, but from my perspective, is that where one of the gaps we have is just browsers. And you're going back to the number one protocol, HTTPS, how we run environments now, and its infrastructure being run by people that we don't have control of their infrastructure, right? And we're in the cloud. And I mean, remember in the military environments and, the mid 2000s, mid 2010s, we never would have gone into FedRAMP and AWS federal. That was not the concept. We had whole stigs on how do we control things that are in our physical spaces and how do we control the physical space. Now we're in this world where we don't control IT, and we have more HTTPS, more access through the browser, bringing more and more stuff in, and we can't tell who's good or who's bad anymore because it's just an explosion of data connections all around the world. If we're lucky, we have ITAR countries, and we can just block ITAR countries and just block.
But that doesn't work either because nobody's going right back to .ru, right back.
Absolutely not.
Right back. I mean, in fact, what we see is most of, I call it gray infrastructure. So I simplify the world. The world is red, blue, gray.
Okay.
Red needs gray to get to blue. The three methods of gray, which I've covered, are internet, RF access, close access. Close access can be supply chain interdiction, right? So that's where you see things getting pulled in through the supply chain, hence log4j. And then, that happens. And the idea is gray is what obfuscates directly to red. If blue sees that it's direct to red, of course, you're going to be able to stop it. That's so easy to do.
Easy bottom pyramid chain, IOC.
But if it's yet another node that's going to AWS out of the 5,000 AWS instances you have,
you can't tell.
You're not going to tell. And AWS is US. This is where there was a really big push a couple of years ago for know your customer in the cloud side, because that was an attempt to try to reduce that. And that, of course, went nowhere because even that, it's like, well, what would we really accomplish other than introducing more friction into the process?
Absolutely. And businesses don't like friction. I mean, we did the same thing at a bank, and it was like a nightmare. I can't tell you how many bypass proxy requests I had for all these new customers that just started businesses and were going online, right? It was a nightmare.
Which defeats the point.
Yeah. And then again, it's like, what can you see on the network today? We used to have a lot of good perimeter security IDS certificates and being able to see what traversed our perimeter. And that's kind of gone away with the endpoint-to-endpoint encryption. Everyone's going encrypted, right? And which is good. Now, I'm not saying don't use encryption, but I think it makes it a lot harder to detect what's going on in your network when you basically are blind to all the communications that are happening through HTTPS across your network. From my perspective, looking at what's going on in your user community and in your browser, and seeing what's happening in the browser is a great place to be because it's all clear text and you can put some amount of detective and preventative capabilities in it. And then you know what your users are doing. And then hopefully that kind of, from what I'm learning from you today is how do I know what my users are doing versus what it is that my potential adversaries are using, right? Who's doing...
Looking like my users.
Huh? Yeah.
Looking like my users.
Looking like my users, but not my users, right? The threatscape's evolved, where we've gone from we've talked a little bit about the dirty little secrets in cyber, that we have a lot of detection, a lot of data. How do we prioritize what it is that we're doing, right? And where it is that we're looking, and how do we limit, what it is that we're putting in front of a human, right? We've talked about AI, and we've talked about how that's creating more living off the land tools that's creating, easier access to our data in some ways for our adversaries.
I think the biggest thing, again, where I was talking during the definition of a purple team, is don't think you need to have your own hackers. You need to be able to spend $50,000 for hackers, right? The traditional pen test. You don't need that. That's not what I'm pointing out. What you need is some way to just drive an appropriate red signal, and you want to do that in two ways. The one that everybody immediately thinks about is the threat-informed approach. How do I most realistically drive a red signal that looks like a threat campaign? And going back to what we were talking earlier about PowerShell and living off the land, you can collaborate with your IT folks to get some PowerShell commands to drive this. Like, again, for free, it's what you've already got.
Yes.
My favorite free tool that's out there is Atomic Red Team by Red Canary. A great place to get started. Now, it's in the name, it's Atomic, which is the checklist periodic table approach. But in terms of getting started, I mean, that's a great place to get started for the best price of free. So that's the first part I recommend on that. The other way, instead of threat informed, do a controls based approach. So the same way that we push things in development with a quality assurance into release, why aren't we doing that for some of the security controls and the things we're pushing there? And the idea there is, instead of bringing, like, I'm going to, the Iranians are in the news a whole lot, right? So Scattered Spider, APT 33, 34, and 35, instead of having that threat informed approach, let's look and go, okay, like, I'm pretty sure you pay for a DLP, right? Data loss prevention. I'm pretty sure you're not getting a whole lot for what you're paying, John, for your data loss prevention. And it's not because of the vendor. It's just because it's a hard problem, again, that requires tuning and baselining. So let's put this in place and let's go, all right, how would I test this? How would I validate this? How would I improve this? Well, going back to the communication protocols, let's try to do all the communication protocols in our environment. Let's come up with different ways to encrypt and extract different pieces of information in different ways in our environment that we would want to make sure that looks like a baseline, that doesn't look like a baseline, and see what happens. That's a controls-based test where, again, I'm being creative on coming up with things that are already in my environment, so I'm not paying for anything, reusing those as an entire scope test to now see what I did get or don't get. So validate your assumptions. And those are the two ways to do it.
Yeah, I worry that we have like somewhat of a brain drain from a security engineering perspective and a security architecture perspective. I feel like we're outsourcing so much of that to SaaS vendors today that I worry even though we're saying free, right? You know, it's you're hoping that you have the talent in-house to kind of help you with that. And
yeah,
I feel like that's changed a lot in the last, 10 years or so. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Grim Reaper and the Scythe imagery.
Sure.
It seems like you have a kind of
a theme going,
a theme here.
Yeah. So back when I was in the intelligence community, my nickname was Grim. I told you what our mission was. And so at the briefs, I would read names. Someone was like, that's pretty grim. And I was like, I mean, nobody cares about the nerd stuff. You care about the results. So I got the nickname Grim. And in 2013, when I went to create my consultancy by myself, I mean, Bryson's consultancy sounds okay at best, probably a little douchey, but Grim sounded pretty cool. So I collaborated with a graphic designer from Blizzard, and we came up with that logo.
It's a great one.
Which I learned is a Rorschach test, because there were a number of folks who were like, it's comical, it's silly. And I'm like, you aren't the kind of people I'd ever want to work with. So this works out. And Target came to us in 2016 with their problem to build red team tools. And that's where I came up with the idea of Scythe, which we called Project Crossbow at the time. And so the story there was I asked to keep the intellectual property when I did the co-development with them, because I'm like, I've read about this. This is called a product. I feel like some other people would find this interesting if you need it. And I spent 2 years co-developing Project Crossbow with Target. And I realized I knew nothing about commercial software sales and development. So I was like, that's what VCs are good for. They know that. They've been there. They've got that t-shirt. So Ron Gula, who co-founded Tenable, and Dmitry Alperovich, who co-founded CrowdStrike, helped me launch Scythe. So Grim people, Scythe tool. And I'm like, yeah, but a scythe is boring. It's just a piece of wood and metal. And I mean, I can't, brain confusion. I can't mix the Grim back in. So what do? Well, Grim, we used to do a t-shirt contest for DEF CON. And one year I came up with the idea of a little comic Grim Reaper riding a unicorn. And this design just blew up. Everybody wanted it. And I was like, people are into these unicorns. So came up with the Scythe unicorn in 2018, and it has been our thing ever since. And it's why some of your viewers may have seen me occasionally dress up as the unicorn to extend the bit as the founding CEO when I'm out there helping preach the good word.
Yeah, I love it. I love the logos. I need to get a set of stickers for myself on my laptop here.
I thought I gave you stickers when I saw you.
I probably have them. I just need to go find them. But
I definitely gave you the trio stickers of the unicorns.
And then
more, John, if you need them, anything to help you.
Okay. And then what's this unicorn chef? What's unicorn chef? Tell me about that.
Yeah, the award-winning Unicorn Chef Show now. So the show just won an award in Europe in the blogging category for a creative approach. So COVID happened. I have always seen myself, I'm very much a dad, and I kind of look at myself in the same way with the community, that I feel like part of my job is to help a lot of folks, which is where you see me do a lot of volunteer work and the things that I do. But I've also been really known for being quite the chef. I host and I do a lot of stuff like that. So COVID kicks off and I'm like, everyone's losing their minds. I was teaching yoga. I was doing costume contest happy hours. I was doing all these things, events that I just made up on my own. And I'm just to keep people from going crazy. And I was like, you know what? I have to eat. So I have to cook. And why don't I do a show on that? And I want it to be as amateur as possible. I literally would put my laptop on like my slow cooker to get the angle. And it was me and a guest chef and every week. And the idea is they would pick the recipe. We'd publish a week in advance and then we would cook it together on the show. So we have a really robust chat section actually, and everybody gets to cook along with us. So you make dinner with us. We both do that. And then we would, the guests would highlight, a charity for folks to donate to. So we've been doing that for 5 years now. We've raised tens of thousands of dollars for charity. I really want to give credit to Star Brown, who came to me last year because when COVID ended, unfortunately, as a product CEO, I have to live on an airplane. So I couldn't quite keep the show up. And she came to me, she said, we love the idea. Do you mind if I produce it? And so we have a whole collection of guest chef hosts now. There are episodes every week. If you find it on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Twitch, I don't know, we're everywhere, I think. And that's what we're doing. And if folks want to come on, reach out and I'll set you up with one of the hosts and, talk a little bit about whatever you find interesting, highlight a charity of your choice and share some amazing cuisine.
Amazing. I'm going to go find it and start watching it myself. I love that idea. So you do a podcast also. And what's one piece of advice you'd gotten from a cybersecurity professional that really stuck with you?
So I do a podcast through the nonprofit ICS Village, which is critical infrastructure security. Some folks have hobbies. Mine is keeping your water and electricity safe. When I co-founded that with Tom Van Norman. And we came up with a podcast 5 years ago. It's now in its fifth season called Hack the Plant. Interestingly enough, it is a top podcast in the world, which is pretty amazing considering we have no marketing. We are professionally produced, but we don't market it at all. And I also find this curious. Can you guess the number 2 country for our viewership? And it is right behind the US.
I would guess China.
Russia.
Wow.
Russia loves my Industrial Control System podcast. And then I do a webinar series called Unicorn Dispatch Live with Scythe, where about twice a month, similar to what you do, I just look for, I think, interesting people doing interesting things out there. Again, I tend to avoid the technical deep dive stuff because I just don't find that as applicable. And I think we have more of a thinking problem. If we can think about how to set the chessboard, we're going to do a lot better than just mastering the individual chessboard or the individual chess moves on the board we have.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of people that I like to bring are folks who are VCs and how they invest in the market. So I have Richard Seawald, who is the managing partner at Evolution Equity, which has a $1.1 billion cybersecurity fund they just raised. I think it's the biggest one in the world, right? This is a guy who really is looking at the chessboard. And I want to share those kinds of insights with folks. So that's probably the biggest thing that I would share is just the guests that I cultivate and the different ways that they're doing things. We need to be looking more not at the best technical moves in front of us, but the best people moves and strategy and the way to set that so people can be happier and more successful in what they're doing. And that's the recurring theme that I try to pull out of my guests, and all the little nuances of how they're doing that in their work is what I would say is the most interesting things that I've seen.
Yeah. I love that advice. I love that point of view. I think that being a buyer today is really difficult because everyone's promising you the world. And it's even though, we're talking about more money, better security postures, but the truth is that a lot of that technology and investments that are being made are actually not being used or not actually helping you defend your environment. So being more strategic about what it is that you're defending, how you're defending, I think those are way better to have a strategy on it than just kind of buying whatever the vendors are selling you. So,
and as we've been talking in this episode, that's the breakdown. It's not that the tool doesn't do what the salesperson told you. It's that it's the way it works. I'll give a quick anecdote because I know we're at time here. Did a test for an enterprise, and they had one of the big EDRs, and it was a ransomware test. So we simulated ransomware in the environment, and the EDR didn't stop it, and they were all angry because they're paying 7 digits for this, right?
Sure.
And it's like, well, no, it's not that it didn't do what it said; it's the way it did it. And so the way it did it is there was a canary file in a particular directory. And if you didn't touch that file, good to go, right? So it did what it said. It's just the way it did it. Like I said, validate your assumptions. You have to make your tools yours. And then something I'll say, which is definitely going to resonate at the CISO level, is tools are not policy. Tools don't make things happen. People make things happen. Executives make things happen. And then tools just make you just help you get there quicker once you pick the right direction.
Good way to end. Thanks, Bryson.
Thanks for having me, John.